investment opportunities. Can fashion provide that kind of an investment opportunity? What really is sticking in the minds of, whether it's VC funding or PE funding or just going down the traditional route, what's on their minds when they're looking at fashion as a lucrative option, a revenue generating option, something that can go right down to the bottom line as well. So to talk about that, may I now invite on stage Deep Mishra, who's Managing Director at Everstone Capital Advisors, Pradeep Hirani, Chairman and Founder of Kimaya Luxury. I'm not sure if he's made it to the conference this afternoon. Shailesh Chaturvedi, who's CEO of Tommy Hilfiger India. VT Bharadwaj, who's Managing Director and Partner at Sequoia Capital. And moderating that discussion and leading it forward is Harminder Sahni, who's Founder and Managing Director at Wazir Advisors.
So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And you know the topic, we are talking about the fashion industry. What else at the Images Fashion Forum, and being part of the industry for last almost 25 years, actually more, the year 1985 when I was selected to become a textile engineer. So I think that's the day my fate was sealed, that I have to be part of this industry and happy to be here. And we are talking about the opportunity and investment opportunities and excitement about this sector. And on our panel, we have people who are equally committed to this sector, either as investors or as the people who have started companies or who are managing very, very large fashion businesses, online, offline, both. So I'll give you a little bit of background about the panel, and then each one of the panelists, when I go to them, that's when I'll introduce them briefly to you so that you're able to get to the person that who are we talking about and why I'm asking them what I'm asking them. See, I came into this sector to work as a professional back in 1992 and was selling sewing thread and then got into selling textiles and then got into consulting somehow. And again, don't ask me how I ended up in US for a couple of years to work again in the fashion industry. And in India, while we didn't even have 100 crore brands, I was working as a consultant with brands like Gap, which were at that point of time itself was multi-billion. And there was a business which was just selling uniforms and it was $700 million business. And my reason of coming back was that looks like everything is already done and over in US. And if India, if anything I need to do, I should go back to India and try to do these things back in India. So nothing new, but whatever has happened, possibly looking at it through like a time machine and can do that. And those 2 years while I was there, I realized that most of the time when we were doing projects in consulting in India, our projects used to start with figuring out information about the market. What's the market size? What's the growth? What are the segments? All of that. And while in US, consultants will start their projects from where our projects used to end, because they will have all those things anyway available on the tap. Everybody knew what it is. It may not be true even today that every information is available on the tap and we don't know whether what's coming out is right or not. But 99, when I came back, I said, this is the industry I belong to and nobody knows what the size of the fashion industry is. So I sat down and worked on an Excel sheet for a few weeks and then came out with a number. The size of this industry is 47,500 crores, right? And it was a fairly complex Excel sheet as compared to what used to be before that, where you had to work on pen and pencil. And so somebody asked me that 47,500 crores, why are you so confident this is the size of the market? I said, go find your own, because this is what I believe is the size, because nobody else is saying it. So I claimed that position, and that 47,500 crore in 99 today, and I told some people that, forget about the units, just take it as an index, that this is what it is today and what it becomes. So today that index is close to around 400,000. Crores, millions, billions, let's not even bother about. So industry has grown 8 times in the last 15, 16 years. That means it doubles almost every 5 years. So what other industry which is so large and grows at a pace where it's doubling in less than 5 years, every 5 years, right? And within that, when you look at the potential of taking it to the ready-made, taking it to the package, taking it to the branded level, right? And then the experience of selling it in offline stores, online store, all of it, what can be more exciting than that? So I'm a optimist about, not over-optimistic about this industry as compared to many, whether consumer electronics, telecom, financial services. I'm very optimistic about it. And I believe my panelists also are, so that's why they are here. So that's one part. Second piece, excitement part, opportunity part is established. Second piece is that why people invest into it and why people start companies to do fashion business. And many a times we have been asked this question by people who are not from fashion industry, we want to get into this industry, how do we get in? Similarly from investors, and I have 3 points which I just wanted to make, and then we'll start with the discussion. First part, any person who is getting into investing in this company, as a private equity investor or as a HNI or as a corporate, I think what they need to look for, they need to look for the people who they are going to put money on. It's not about the brand, not about the product, because it changes every day. What they need to look for is that, are those people committed to the industry? It's not like any other consumer products company, where you have a bar of soap or a bottle of oil or a tube of toothpaste, and this is what you need to sell every day. Every day you have to kill your own product, sell it at a discount, and create new products. Very, very different. So only people who are very committed to this, and they're enjoying doing that, otherwise it's big pain. Why should you be getting into this business? So that commitment is very, very important in the team who is doing it. Second is they should have the confidence, because you go out and tell people that I want you to wear these purple trousers, or I want you to wear this printed shirt this season. Right? So you need to have big confidence in your product, in your design, only then you can be in this business. Thirdly, obviously, the competence. So you may have a lot of confidence, you have a lot of commitment to it, but you may not have the competence. The competence is very, very important, that can you actually do it, because it's a very, very competitive market and you need all of that. Similarly, when people are taking investment, there are again 3 things which I tell these people, that you need to look at the color of the money first, very clearly, that where the money is coming from. Money is money, but no, the color of money is important. Where is the origin of the money? And we have seen situations in the last 10 years where the color of money spoiled the whole flavor of the market. Second is the bag in which the money is coming in, and bag I mean is the terms in which it is coming in. What is the investor asking you to do, and what are the terms and conditions put in there? People fail to look at that, and we have seen, I will not give examples, but we have seen when the investee companies went for the biggest bidder, and ended up in situations where they lost their companies. And thirdly, obviously, who is carrying that bag? Because this man is going to be sitting on your head with those Excel sheets on the basis of which you ask for all that money every quarter and asking those questions. So you need to be very, very sure of that. So with that, now having set the tone for the fashion industry opportunity and then investors' view, I'll move on to that. And in this case, first of all, I would like to go to somebody, Pradeep Hirani here, where he has over the last, I don't know how many years, since the time I have known him, so at least 25 years, has been committed to the fashion industry. And so while he is a fashion businessman, but I see him more like an investor first, that he has invested into designers' future, he has invested into their businesses, invested into their brands, and helped them come to the level they have come. So Pradeep, what was it when you started, and what you felt was the reason, and those exciting days, and whether the foolish days, do they still remain the same? You are as excited about this business. Where do you see the opportunity? Few words.
Okay, going down memory lane. I started Kemaya 14 years back when Indian designers had multi-million-dollar valuations, but no balance sheets. It was a scattered market, completely unorganized. I saw opportunity there. I saw it getting here in no time, and I focused on it, and that's what I did. Having said that, the business has evolved. 14 years has been a long journey. You know, there have been hiccups, there have been speed breakers, there have been great things happening in this industry. Today, it has come of eminence. I think there is nothing about a designer label tag. That's the highest a woman can aspire for, a man can aspire for. I think to be an aggregator of designer wear is offering a great convenience to the client. So think of it from the client's point of view. I mean, it's a win-win for the client. That's what made me go ahead for this. And of course, can't fault on the energy levels. Here in this business, to succeed, you have to stand on your toenails to survive. And it has great energy, great excitement. Everything that works today will definitely not work tomorrow. And that's the charm of the business.
And how has been the journey so far?
Well, so far it's been exciting. Can't complain. Of course, I can't say that business has been fabulous in the last 2 years. The environment has not been as conducive as it used to be earlier. Last 2 years, India has seen a difficult time. But these are pauses. They're healthy pauses. I'm sure this is just a lull before the storm.
Great. So Shailesh, I'll come to you next. And Shailesh, most of you will know that he is one of those few people who, coming out of IIMS, chooses to join fashion industry. right? Most of the people would like to sell packaged products, FMCG products, and be very happy with life. So what I was saying earlier, so he's one of those bold people who came out and joined Madura Garments and then spent half of his working life there and now responsible for building Tommy Hilfiger in India. And I'm sure he'll do many more things. And but Shailesh, so commitment, that's the first thing which I said. So nobody can show more commitment than you have shown to the sector. So how do you see the opportunity? How do you see the future of the sector? Just elaborate on that a bit.
You know, I think I would entirely agree to what you said, Harminder, about the opportunity. Opportunity is immense. You know, when I see internationally, every country has many organizations which are multi-billion-dollar valued companies in this sector. So I think, you know, opportunity is immense. And if I look at every metrics, whether it's percentage of organized business, the 50% of trousers are still tailored, and that opportunity to make that ready-made, unbranded to branded, unorganized to organized, the opportunity is immense. But I would say, as a practitioner, I've been working in this field for last 24 years. I think somewhere this whole thing about opportunity and excitement takes too much of time. My focus would be on execution. See, if really want to do anything with this industry going forward, opportunity is immense, and we still are a growing GDP, growing population, young population. I think, but that's not important. What is important is that if you want to create something nice, whether it's of high standard, something that makes you sleep well at night, or something that creates huge valuation, whatever is the criteria that you want to look at it, it all comes from something known as execution. And I think that's where our industry is still in very infancy. So I would say that someday we have to realize that it's not just about excitement and opportunity and all that, and growth and whatever. It is about how well we as an industry are able to execute. Are we able to execute it the way some of the IT companies are executing? Are we able to execute the way some of the fashion companies are executing in the global sense? I think the challenge is going to go more from the opportunity, which is well defined, and I think we shouldn't spend too much time about it. But how do we execute that opportunity is, to me, is the bigger issue.
You see that industry is in a better position. We have a better ecosystem, professional pool as compared to what we had 10 years ago.
I'm a bit cynical about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Harminder,
so you want reality.
I think our execution standards are quite weak right now. There's a lot to do. I was in Mall of India in Noida, which is the largest mall recently opened, and probably the largest square foot expansion India has seen ever. It's double the size of the current biggest mall. And if you really see, go floor to floor, brand to brand, store to store, I think the execution standards are quite weak. And I'm not trying to judge somebody else. I'm talking about myself, right? We are talking about as an industry person, right, that as an industry, we have to do a lot better job.
Okay, good. VT. So we have, if I have to think about some of the largest investors in India in the fashion industry, so first name obviously we'll think of people like Arvind Brands, then Madura Garments, and then you'll talk about Reliance Brands. And serious money these people have put into the industry. Reliance being the latest entrant in the last 5-6 years they have put in, but Madura and Arvind have been on it for decades, right? And then you look at Sequoia, which have invested into so many fashion companies. I think that should be amongst those, along with those names, it should be there. So while one can say Mr. Birla coming from the textile background, Mr. Lalbhai coming from the textile background, and Reliance being Reliance, again coming from the textile background, will do it. Sequoia, where did you come from? Where did you choose to become part of this club?
It's a very interesting question. I don't think I've reflected that deeply on that. But maybe some of the enthusiasm around this space was from the fact that before I was at Sequoia, I've been at Sequoia for 9 years, and before that I was at McKinsey, and we were again, like what you were saying, obviously consulting for many international companies that were looking to come to India. And you're absolutely right. I remember in 2001 or 2002, we were trying to come up with what is the right answer for a premium luxury brand entering India, who had seen massive success in China and was asking the question saying, look, I have this one store for the last 10 years or 5 years, nothing much has happened. What do I do here? Should I shut it down or should I come back after a few years? And I remember at that time as a young consultant trying to figure out, and the absolute paucity of knowledge in terms of market size. And at that time, I don't know whether Images was doing events, but there was this book, Images 2001, which probably was amongst the first studies done just to estimate various market sizes, see how the market sizes evolve with respect to price points, and then trying to develop a view saying, is India ready for brands? If so, at what price points? And then how big can those brands be? And therefore ask yourself the question saying, if you're someone sitting outside of India, and let's say you have a very large business, you're asking the question saying, should I enter India now or should I enter India later? So that's probably what caught my fashion. I'm just trying to think through why it was interesting. I did a fair number of projects in McKinsey at that time. And therefore, when I joined Sequoia, it was natural to look at this space. And I completely agree with Shailesh that we spend more time talking about the opportunity in this market and less time on what it takes to succeed in this market. And I think I'd hope that today we spend more time on the second, because it is very obvious that it's a large market. And that it's a multi-billion dollars, and there are many categories there, and several trends on underlying trends, unbranded to branded, unorganized to organized, different types of products in every segment, whether it's men, women, kids, etc. So I don't think the challenge in this market has been about opportunity or market size, which is a very real issue in many product categories. So therefore, one should not be dismissive of that, but that's very good. I think the challenge in this category has been, how do you execute so that you can build a really high quality business that can scale independently for many years. I think that is the puzzle in this business. And that puzzle, some folks like Shailesh have solved it, for a brand and said, this is how you do it. And therefore, then you ask the question saying, how do I replicate this for either a different brand or a different product? But I think that is the part which is, been, I would say, missing, on a relative basis. And I think what we have, and as investors, we have many investments, as Harminder, you pointed out, in this space. And what we're beginning to see, maybe versus 7-8 years back, is we're beginning to see better execution. We're beginning to see more higher caliber professionals getting interested in the category and wanting to do this, not just for how interesting it looks and how glamorous it looks, but really saying, I really want to do this on a sustainable basis over a period of time. We're beginning to see some of those changes. And I think one of the things which people don't appreciate getting into this business, it's a damn tricky business. It's a very tricky business. And I explained this to Harminder the way we see it at Sequoia, right? It's a combination of someone who is very close to the customer and you're constantly reinventing the product every season. It's almost like you have a movie every 3 months or every 6 months, and then the movie becomes a hit or a flop. You very quickly assess whether it's a hit, and then you figure out how to maximize margins and sell-throughs. If it's a loss, you quickly figure out how to cut losses, do an end-of-season sale, and make sure that you have capital to reinvest in another movie in the next season. So on one side, there is a complexity of being very close to the customer, determining or predicting their taste. Based on the taste, you come up with a product, and then based on the consumer feedback, you relentlessly change the product. So that's on the consumer side. And on the back end, it's like a financial services business. You have inventory, you have raw material, you have output, and like loans go bad, your product goes bad. And then you have to figure out how to manage it. So it's a very tricky business because it has both these elements. And I think that is why it has been hard to get the right business. I think there is a reason for it. And that is why execution is so important. You need to get both right. You need to keep improving our predictive ability, keep improving the ability to shape consumer views and sometimes respect consumers' views on one side, on the demand side. And then while always remembering that this is a balance sheet business. So great that you grew revenues by 100%, but frankly, in life, who cares? Because ultimately, what matters is whether what you sold, did you realize the cash for it? Did you make the profits from it? And then are you then able to plow the profits back, for the next season? So I think it's an inherently tricky business, which in addition to high caliber professionals, some of the other changes will hopefully help. I think organized retail is certainly helping because one of the ways to solve this problem is to get feedback from customer more quickly so that you can respond to it, you can be agile. I think organized retail helped us as an industry do more of it. I think technology, I think internet is certainly helping us do more, right? Because you're able to keep even lower inventory and then see how demand responds and then accordingly react. So I think as the feedback loops become shorter and shorter, it should become easier and easier to build interesting businesses here that can scale. But I think the biggest mistake in our mind has been done, whether by investors or by companies, is in chasing mindless growth in this business. I think that has been the underbelly, if you say the weak underbelly in this industry. I think the people who have succeeded, and there are people who have succeeded, and whether it's in innerwear or whether it is in apparel, and now we are beginning to see so many Indian ethnic brands have built fabulous businesses in the last 10 years, and W and Biba. None of this, they may have existed, but none of them in the shape and form that you see today were around in 2006-07. And I think they've benefited from this wave. But I think so we're beginning to see some of the early successes emerge. And that will hopefully, create a larger pool of people who execute well and then recognize the tricky nature of this beast and then accordingly, build their businesses. But that has been, so we've had tremendous learning at Sequoia in the last 8-9 years across both these dimensions.
I think you're right about this, finding this balance between the front and the back end, fashion, creativity, and the seriousness of an accountant when you're looking at the balance sheet and the numbers. And probably that's the reason, because people like us talk too much about potential and drag people to grow much faster and make those mistakes. But that's fine, everybody has their job to keep, so I do mine, you do yours. And I think the successful ones like Keval Kishan, if you look at Monte Carlo, if you look at very traditional businessmen, and they have created some of the best performing businesses. So I think you are right about that, and these are exceptions.
Because I think the important thing here is, while we all recognize that the opportunity is immense, I think it is important that, and I don't know how many investors say this, and I'll sound very foolish if you quote me as an investor who doesn't like growth, but I think it's an industry that requires patience. I think it's an industry that says, you must come in here, you must understand your customer, and over a period of time, and the period of time is not 2-3 years for sure. That has been our biggest learning across both our successful investments and those investments where it has not been that easy. Is be patient, and then we will figure out the right thing to do.
Thanks, sweetie. So Deep, coming to you. So Everstone as a company, most of the people will know Everstone. They invest big time into food because things like Burger King and all other businesses get a lot of attention. But in fashion, you are a bit of a hesitant investor. And most people will not even know, but it's your history, so wherever it went, it doesn't matter. But investing on Anita Dongre, long back when she was not even 10 crores in business, and where she is today, and big pause in between, and then finally Ritu Kumar. So you don't get excited with all the big talk people like me give here and there. So you are an investor, but a hesitant one. Why so?
So yeah, yes, you're right, Harminder. We were one of the earliest investors in the space in terms of, as a platform, we invested in A&D and Biba. And, Biba also, by the way, which you forgot to mention, we were the early investors when they were also very, very tiny. And then there was a long break. Then we sort of, looked at it from a very top-down approach. The reason why we chose Ritu Kumar was, again, we took a top-down approach, consumption sectors. Where is the growth? So we did a little bit of the macro, which obviously what VT is saying, God gets everybody excited. So we looked at which is the one sector which has not had a bad year in the last 20 years, and that was actually luxury. So except for 2008, luxury never had a bad year. There was a never negative growth anywhere in the world. And that's the reason why we sort of, and then we looked at which were the sizable players in that segment and which were very clearly positioned. So the way we've now made our sort of framework when we invest in anything which is consumption driven is the sort of the 6P model. So you have the 4 Ps, which are the standard: product, price, placement, promotion. Then the people and the processes as well. So, you have to have a very clear positioning, very distinct identity for your brand. Unless you have that, if you're a little bit confused, right in terms of pricing, in terms of product. Now in this, right, like VT is pointing out, the complication is that product is very important and the people are very important. In many other businesses, the paisa, which is the 7th P, which is capital, is very important, but not in this business. It's all about people, processes, and the product. and getting that mix right. So processes, like Salish has pointed out, we are probably as an industry in India, in terms of how to handle fashion, we're probably a 3 on 10, I would still say. We're probably between a 3 and a 4. People, we are very, very passionate people. But again, I would say 70% of the promoters we meet are doing this business as a lifestyle. You know, it's not really as a business. You know, getting that promoter, getting those people who understand that this is actually a business is one of the hardest things in the sector. You know, the talent pool, you know, it's a very incestuous kind of a talent pool. It's all sort of from within, you know, not so many people from outside. So best practices from FMCG, what I call the technology of sales, which people like HUL and P&G have perfected over 125 years in India. None of this that has really touched this sector. You know, the best practices in terms of FMCG, and they are there. They're there in India. They're there in other sectors. But like some of the other smaller sectors, which is very insular, the sort of, this thing is a little bit, the whole professionalization has a little bit passed this industry a little bit by. And it's more about, you know, more about the, what, you know, the image and the sort of glamour that drives people into the sector, rather than look at it as a business. So from that perspective, you know, we are in that space where we look at consumption as a whole. You know, we don't have to play every pitch, that is every ball that is thrown to us. Only if we get the right pitch will we swing. So from that perspective, finding an asset which sort of fits into the 6 Ps, I would say, the right product for the right market, at the right price, having the right people back it, with the right kind of mind and processes in place, and you know, with the right kind of positioning to be able to drive differentiation. You know, that's very, very important, and you don't get that very often in this sector. That's the reason we just take our time and, you know, find the niches where we want to play.
Right. So that's the reason you are saying for not making as many investments as you would love to make it. But at the same time, there are enough investments happening in the sector. So do you think other people are not seeing these things, or they are missing on something?
No, so there are different folks there are different strokes for different folks here. So, you know, like VT, we are not extremely impressed by breakneck growth. We are not actually. Because, you know, we have to look at balance sheets, we have to look at how that growth is happening. We have to look at whether the primary growth numbers we see actually is reflecting in sell-throughs, because that's a big concern with many, many transactions that we've seen. And we've let go of several transactions because we just don't believe the numbers. Right. Now, this is one of the problems specifically with this sector, which is a big problem with this sector. And we've let go of many transactions because we just don't believe the numbers that are thrown out. Because, you know, frankly, the inventory valuations that happen here, because see, the thing is, many sub-segments of this market, you have to reinvent the business almost every 6 months. So, you know, trends change. It's easy for me to value inventory of a soap. You know, I know by date what it is worth. It's so damn hard to value inventory of a fashion. Because, you know, is this really, can I sell a yellow colored suit, you know, a canary yellow colored suit 2 seasons down? At what price? Maybe at no price can I sell it. Maybe I just have to junk it.
Yeah, exactly, zero.
So it may be zero. So, you know, people have large inventories, and, you know, getting that bit, you know, we're very, very concerned about that, and therefore we've been leaving a lot of transactions which are happening. We're letting them go. Shailesh has something to say.
Can I just make a, you know, we have 2 of the biggest funds here, Sequoia and Everstone. So, you know, we don't want to break the heart of a lot of young sort of fashion industry entrepreneurs here. And actually one of the agenda for this topic was also that if let's say budding college student coming out of NIFT, okay, and he or she has a unique thought process, like a tech startup in Koramangala in Bangalore, or something similar to that. Now, you guys are sitting here. Now, you know, look at positively. Let's say, what is the message to that individual? That, you know, how can he or she raise funds from Sequoia and Everstone. There are current issues, and I'm the first one who's saying that we need execution. But I'm also don't want to break the heart of the youngsters, because I think we all live on hope, right? And we all want to seed that optimism and positivity in that 23-year-old young or boy or girl. Ki boss, you can have a dream, you can be the Steve Jobs of future, and you can be the Jack Ma of future. So why don't you sort of look at that way, that what they need to do, what they can, what are the do's, what is the process, what they need to do, so that, you guys chase him and her and sort of fund him and her.
So I'll just add one point. So I think very, very good question. I think the fundamental issue that someone has to chase is differentiation. How can you own, even if it is a very small niche, how can you own that niche? I would say if you go after that with a very clear positioning, with a very clear differentiation, you cannot be a me too. Then there might be situations where people will actually chase you.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point, Shailesh. I'm glad that you made it, because we have invested over like last 9 years across the cycle. Whether it's a Genesis Luxury, which was 2009, or whether it was a Wildcraft, which was 2013, or a Go Colors, which we invested in 2014. We have invested right through the cycle. And there are some things about what you can do to make it interesting and exciting for investors. I think the first is to, I think the differentiation point is well made, which is to obviously have a real product proposition which is different and unique. Not worry so much about the absolute market size you're targeting, but really saying in this specific market, this is how I am different from some of the other brands. And that's clearly one thing that you can do. The second thing is also think a little bit radical about distribution. Because a lot of the challenges that we spoke about in the nature of this business, which is inventory, how do you value, or think of it as a balance sheet business. I think that is all coming from the very long feedback loop that used to exist in this industry when Madura Garments was trying to build its shirt brands, right? You had all these MBOs spread across the country, multi-brand outlets where you would put your product up, and then the shopkeeper will give you the cash against the product, 3 months after you supplied the product or 6 months after you supplied the product. And there is a lot of loss of, more than the loss of time in getting the money, it's a loss of information about what is the customer doing in that season. And I think if you go back and look at the successes, and let's look at the successes because we can learn a lot more from them. I think if you look at what a Biba did differently or an Ant did differently, I think the fact that they leveraged organized retail, the fact that they put up their own exclusive branded stores to minimize the distance and time between them and consumers, just allowed them to respond much faster in terms of fashion cycle. And then you have lesser of an inventory issue because you have your inventory in your stores, you're managing that very carefully, and then you're constantly getting feedback from the customer on whether the product is working or not. So that is one way in which people have tried to minimize this information loss. The second way people have done it, and that's, Jockey is the best quoted example in this space, is by minimizing, being very sharply focused and saying, I am fashionable, but I'm occupying a very small sliver of what the consumer is buying. So I don't want to be the guy who supplies a woman to a woman all the garments that she can wear across multiple occasions, but I will just pick one occasion, one product, only supply that. And because I have such small number of SKUs, I have a very different distribution strategy. So you're almost choosing to say, even though I'm playing in the fashion space, I'm going to be so sharply focused that I don't have to change my product that much every cycle. So I think people have chosen that. Either they've innovated on distribution, they've been very sharp about which products they're focused on, right? And by doing this, they have made their business simpler, which is the advice I would give for all young people. Make your business simpler, and then it just makes it easier to scale. Now, I'll give you an example. Go Colors is still a very young company. It's a legwear company, but the way they have simplified business is to say, I will only do cotton, I will only do colors, I will not do any prints, I will start with leggings and anything that looks like leggings and stay very sharply focused on that. Now, that's a way of simplifying what you're doing and saying, I will only do this. Now, the implication is, yes, women's legwear market may be multi-billion dollars, but you can't have a slide which says, I'm attacking multi-billion dollars, but you can say, I have a slide which attacks 1,000 crore business, but really sharply, right? I think that allows you to simplify your business. And the good news for you is that the rate of change in distribution, which is coming from online, makes your life even easier, right? Because then in offline, you have to open a few bunch of EBOs and show up and have your product. In online, your life is even easier. There are different challenges with online, but one thing that it certainly does is make your life on distribution easy. So I think those are the 2-3 very positive things for you to focus on, which is how do you simplify your business model by focusing on product, making distribution choices very smartly, and leverage the fact that technology is helping you with some of that.
Thanks, VT. So I still remember when I was a student of 12th standard, there's something called simplex equation. I never figured out what it was. So he from IIT and Deep also from IIT, they know it. So they are asking us to understand a simplex, which is simple and complex both, and how to figure that out. I am not best advisor to suggest on that. So coming to our last panelist, who I roped in over lunch, because I came across him, and at the moment I looked at him, I thought that why didn't I think of him, Sanjay Guleria from Exclusively.in. So he founded the company, he sold the company, he bought it back, and he sold it again and bought it back. I don't know how many times he did it. So it's like going back to that same girl time and again. Man, there are more fishes in the pond. So anyway, so you are so passionate, so much in love with it. So where do you see it going forward? Because I think that commitment part which I was talking about, you are one of the best examples of commitment coming from some other industry and getting into that, picking up traditional clothing, using technology, selling it to people all over the world. Everything which these people are saying, I think you have taken it into account and then done it. So how has been the journey and how do you see it going forward?
Thanks, Harminder. I think it was fortuitous to bump into you after so many years over lunch. And everything that all the panelists are saying is true, very insightful, very helpful. The journey of an entrepreneur is one filled with passion and perseverance and commitment. In my particular case, had the opportunity to get into a very hyped up market. I think the 2 P's I would add to the other 6 indeed are passion, but also partners. And not only do you pick your early founding team very carefully, you're trusting them for a variety of things. They're trusting you. That's a really critical choice you're going to make early on, but also your investor as a partner. It's a long, drawn-out game. There's highs and lows. There's peaks and valleys. There's ups and downs. There's heartache and joy. So I think that picking your partner, as you were mentioning earlier, is, from a financial standpoint, is equally as important as picking your early founders. The journey saw us go, and I think the last piece, I guess, the biggest learning is perseverance. If you believe in something and you're passionate about it, there will be a lot of noise every single day. Well, things, and this is where the simplex comes in. The simplex is you have a simple idea. The complex is all the noise around you. And it comes in from a variety of angles, a variety of sources, and sometimes even internal anguish and anxiety. But I think if you can persevere, believe in what you're doing, believe in the team, everyone will have a perspective as long as you hold true to your own gut instinct and are following that path. I think things will be successful. I also fundamentally believe it's not about growth of an industry per se. You can come into any industry, a dead industry, a non-growth industry, and disrupt. You can be inside a business that's super unsexy. There's a brand called Happy Socks. No one thought that the sock industry would be exciting, but they came in and saw things differently and saw an opportunity there. So I think that many, many learnings. I'll probably write a book one day. But I think that the journey's been great. Opportunity is tremendous, domestically, internationally. I'm extremely excited about where things are going. Technology convergence begins to change a whole dynamic. At the end of the day, if you were to go and start your own business, one recommendation is it is a lifestyle, it's a passion. Do something that you care about, consume yourself, understand deeply because you come from that particular industry, and stay with it. So, yeah, I mean, I think that the future is extremely, extremely bright. A lot of bright individuals, even though the the financial markets are a bit soft now. I think that perhaps now is a great time to start something entrepreneurial, and there's some great partners along the way. The industry, I do believe there's talent there. I think people have learned a lot in the last 5, 6, 8 years. And you're going to see a second crop of entrepreneurs come back into play. The ecosystem is getting built out, thankfully, and it'll make it easier for innovation and opportunity.
No, I just wanted to point out the unsexy part of it. What can be more unsexy than men's undergarments? And look at Jockey, what they have done. So obviously you're right about that, that there are opportunities and things. Shailesh, I wanted to come back to you. You have built this company, Tommy Hilfiger, in India with 2 investors, or earlier maybe even 3, Tommy itself and then Mr. Moorjani and then Arvind on the other side. So now this section we are going to talk about from both sides, that how is it building business for the investors while you are building it for yourself anyway, but how is it for building for the investor? How is the life managing investors, managing your promoters? Given that we already explained that how simple as well as complex this business is, how exciting it is, but how heartbreaking it is, how you have to every day do something new, but you have to go with the old ways of counting pennies and all of it. So within that, then managing the promoters and the investors.
You know, I'll just take a little longer journey. So I started with British Madura Coats. So there it was a listed sort of 150 years in India in textile. So they were like, you know, been there, done that,
yeah,
big listed company. So that was, we never had the issue. Then I was setting up a international brand division in Madura, and by the time the business got sold to Mr. Birla, the parent company exited the apparel business, and then we became part of AV Birla Group. And then we were setting up this business where we were trying to launch Esprit and Armani and Diesel. And I remember making a presentation to Mr. Kumar Mangalam Birla, seeking 75 crores for the first 3 years, etc. Again, it was like a big conglomerate. They had a, 3-year cash flow projection of 60,000 crores. In fact, they were chasing us. Please give us opportunity. We have, problem of deployment. We want to deploy 60,000 crores. Please tell us where we can deploy. I think 75 crores. That's a chiller, like small amount, but it's okay. 75 crores, it's fine. It's not a big deal. So, in that, I'm just coming one by one. So, just to give you different colors of the, the promoters I work with, and then I worked with, again, briefly Benetton in Hong Kong, a part of the Italian company. Again, similar to the British company. And then I joined this startup. We were just building this Tommy, and there were 2 investors that time. Arvind Limited was still our 50% JV partner, and there was this family called Moorjani who had built the brand globally. So now, compared to a normal investment, what was unique was that both were very seasoned industry people. So they knew the nuances, they knew that inventory is a risk and discounting is a risk, or, the own store has this risk or multi-brand has this risk. So they're very seasoned. I mean, what happens is, this is not a typical case where you have to go to a guy who's actually just bringing investment. He's only looking at IRR or, looking at, EBITDA and exit valuation. These guys are long-term industry veterans who know probably more about the industry than you know. So they're very patient. Like, I heard from the fund industry that this business requires patience. A lot of patience. They said, no, build it, build it, build it. So, and I remember in the beginning, we broke a lot of rules and we didn't have a annual budget. I said, let's work season to season. And our business getting a spring, summer, getting a fall holidays, right. So I think we will only work on 6-monthly cycle, no annual budget. So let's see, this is the target for this season. Let's build that target, achieve that seasonal budget, then we move to the next season. And likewise, then one day we become a normal sort of a corporate. So got a lot of support from, investors because they knew the industry, and frankly, we did really well. So they also very supportive. They knew that, I remember first year, our like-to-like growth was like 30% plus or something. And they all realized, okay, this is exceptional. So they said, these guys are doing right things, so let them do what they're doing. So there was a lot of support, there was a lot of understanding. They were not typical investor. And then Moorjani sold out to the international, the PVH company. Then again, they have a lot of brands, and CK and Arrow and Izod, and they keep buying, selling companies, big corporates. So I've always worked with sort of investors who are very seasoned, long-term. they understand the business. So I've never worked with somebody who is like just coming from outside and could be a fund. The fund know a lot, but I'm saying even they know the business probably better than a fund because they're only from that industry. So I've been that way fortunate to have investors who had a built-in understanding of the business. So that really helped me.
So you have been lucky. You have been very, very lucky. So Deep, how do you approach this? Because this business, like we said, it's so much about commitment, competence, confidence of these people and who need to be, when I say confidence, it's only almost on the verge of being arrogant that this is the yellow suit. I'll still be able to sell this season and I'll get premium for it. And then there are people like you who are seeing business from a very different angle. So how much do you get in terms of involvement before it becomes seen as interference?
So, given that we run consumer businesses ourselves, we give our, so the first thing that we do is choosing the partner who we are partnering is very, very essential. Once you've chosen the right partner, you give him a very, very long rope. So the first step is choosing. If you've chosen right, most likely you don't have to give them you don't have to interfere. Once you've given them a very long rope, we go in only when it is absolutely required. So we will not go in and start, as investors. No, we are a slightly different investor. We're not necessarily boardroom investors. We run our own businesses. For example, I was like acting CEO of Faces for a year. We actually run Burger King now. By the end of this year, our Burger King turnover is likely to be 500 crores in 2 years from starting. So, so we have, when we go in and start so-called interfering, it is with the knowledge that we are practitioners as well. So we will not, first of all, we will be very reluctant to interfere because, that means that we chose wrong. Unless there is a market issue, if there's a market issue, you ride it out. The market issue. But if there are specific issues which need to be fixed, then we will go in and work with the entrepreneur partners. In many situations, actually, we are majority owners. But even in that situation, we will work very closely with the partners and we will not really interfere so much. Yeah.
Deep, why I'm raising this point is because in this room you have a lot of people who, that's why they are here, they want to understand that there's a huge hesitation, which I see from people. From your side, we heard the view that there are not too many companies who are that way cleaner, neater, and transparent enough where you can go in. But from the other side, people have this big fear about financial investors coming in and interfering too much and making them run either too fast or wrong direction or trying to chase different kind of goals. So that's why I asked you this question. So VT, your viewpoint also on the same point will be extremely important so that people get some from the horse's mouth, that how it is actually. They have a lot of preconceived notions otherwise in mind.
No, that's a very good question, and I can completely see why it is important. From a Sequoia perspective, actually, it's relatively straightforward. Look, we think of ourselves as entrepreneurs behind entrepreneurs. Therefore, there is absolutely no question of interference. And what I mean by that is, irrespective of how much ownership we may have, which may be anything from 20 or 30 or 40 or 60, depending upon the company, I think our mindset is that of a minority investor, which means we are really backing the entrepreneur, the founder, to build the business. We have absolutely no illusions about our ability, to build a business. We keep joking, if we had the ability to do that, we should be doing that, versus being in the investing business. The only business that we understand is the investing business. So I think, therefore, as you are evaluating partners, you must think through this carefully because every investor comes from their heritage, their history, their experience, their focus. And you need to figure out what kind of an investor do you really want. That's one. The second is a point that Sanjay made on, it's very important, and what Shailesh also said, which is it is very useful to have an investor who understands the business. Because the metrics in this business, see the metrics in every business on what it will make it a successful, enduring, large franchise are different. And it is foolish, if a financial investor thinks that, the metrics are the same in every business. They are absolutely not. And the metrics in this business, whether it is sell-through, whether it is like-to-like sales growth, which is how much of your growth is coming from your old network versus new network, how much of your percentage is end of season and at what discount. The metrics for what will make your business long-term enduring are different. And therefore, I think it's very important to have an investor on the other side who understands the metrics, because otherwise he or she will ask you to do all the wrong things, whether it is chasing growth or chasing profitability or whatever it may be. Or even thinking through, right, should it be own brand? Should it be other people's brand? Should you think about franchising, or should you think about building your own business? Every question, you will not necessarily get the right counsel and right advice, which I honestly think is what you should look for in an investor, especially if you're setting it up. It's different if you're Arvind and you've done this business for many, many years. You frankly only need money, and that's probably it, if at all, right? But I think if as young entrepreneurs, as young founders trying to build a business, I think it's very important that you pick someone who can give you the right counsel. Because the metrics that need to be successful for you to build a large business are different, for various businesses. So I would say that's basically my view. And I think from a Sequoia perspective, I think it's very clear. And the way you should also think about it is, look, most investors are working with 6, 7, or maybe 8 companies in their life, and that's the investing business. For sure, they don't have time to run operations of any business, leave alone interfere in your business.
Absolutely. So just to add on to the metric idea, I think that there are a number of metrics you can chase, and each industry has different metrics. One metric which I feel is common, and perhaps an entrepreneur should chase very early, especially if you're in the consumer business, is the NPS score metric. I think that, so it's Net Promoter Score, it's the likelihood of a customer referring it on to another customer. And therefore, you've built a good product, or you've built for that consumer base something that people want. And I think that is, I believe, a common metric in the consumer space, which early on, if you're able to know that you have a high Net Promoter Score, that even if your market size is small, at least that segment of the market appreciates what you're doing, and therefore there is opportunity.
Pradeep, coming to you now, managing expectations. You have taken investors. We build a business to a very large scale on your own, and then you brought in investors coming in, and all investors come in with a certain promise you make to them, and you set expectations, and you have to manage expectations over a period of time. And given the nature of the business we have been discussing, whatever you put as projection out there, or whatever you may believe it will happen, doesn't happen. So simplicity, like you said, in your way of thinking, but the complexity of the environment, it creates that. So how do you manage expectations of people who have put so much serious money on you, and rightfully they will have the questions?
Okay, first of all, when we selected Franklin Templeton, we didn't select them for the color of the money. We selected the soul more than the color. Okay, our goals were common, there was great synergy, they understood the nuances of the business, and they're willing to take that effort. Frankly, as my friends on the panel have said, that a lot of funds may not want to, or may not be like to interfere in the operations. For me, it was the other way around. We have been inviting Franklin Templeton, our P investors, to help us, to guide us. We are more like partners. We selected them to help, for them to help us. They add a new perspective, a fresh direction, and that really helps a lot. So when we hit the goal post, we shout together. When we miss it, we sulk together. So it's more of a partnership, and they're involved at every step. We ensure that we have at least once in a week meeting with them. We try at least for once a week. It could happen in once in 10 days, but the effort is there. So it has to be convergent. I mean, the goal has to be convergent.
So in your case, it worked out, but what should one be watching out for the people who are potential investees and they are going to look for? What should they be watching out for? Very specifically, if you can give them some pointers in managing expectations. That's the primarily. You have picked up the right partner, all of that is true, happened. But beyond that, when expectations are not met and shouting, screaming happens, you may have a partner who will understand, but I'm saying imagine the situation you have one who doesn't.
The expectations cannot just be a financial number. It can't just be an IRR or ROI. It has to go much beyond that. These are numbers. These are projections. Projections are never reality. But when they are partners with you in reality, then they are much more understanding. Otherwise, they say, sorry, you promised us X to Y growth, this did happen. But listen, you were part of it. You understood the macro situation in the country also. You knew the positives. You were there all along. So that is, I think it's very, very crucial. And I insist on them being a part of every decision, every major decision. And yes, consensus is very important. It's not just because they say something they are right, because you may understand that particular business mode. They may understand the other angles better, but a consensus is important. You don't want to be fighting with your private equity investor. Otherwise, that's all you'll do. Forget the business. That itself will be another chapter, and it's an all-consuming chapter. So yes, you need to get along. You need to understand. You need to be able to have a drink with them. You need to even argue with them if necessary. That comfort level is the key.
Yeah, unfortunately, there have been instances where things didn't go that way. That's why I wanted to bring it to fore and discuss about it. So I think what you are saying is transparency, communication, involvement, even if they are reluctant, is very, very important. That they must know so that they don't see things coming as a surprise. But there will be surprises on the way. There will be.
Of course.
Yeah. So Sanjay, you have seen this go good, bad, excellent, ugly, all of that. What's your...
No, I mean,
And you are again very different from Pradeep, because he built the business and then he brought in investors, and you brought in investors to build the business.
Correct.
Right, and done it a couple of times. So, and now you have an investor who is a larger online player themselves, and you are sort of like part of that umbrella. A very different kind of people, very different expectations.
Absolutely. I think without a doubt, transparency, communication, expectation setting is critical. The core philosophy of so there's a lot of money out there, and there are a lot of investors to begin with. So as an entrepreneur, if you have the luxury of time, by all means, get to know each of the funds you're speaking with, get to know the human beings behind it, and get to know the philosophy, the core philosophy of the business and the portfolio companies that they manage. Ultimately, you don't want to spend your time fighting fires and literally fighting with your board. As a result, I think it's hypercritical that you spend enough time getting to know your investor, or ultimately who would be on the board from that particular VC or private equity group. So I think, and when things, should they start to go south, I think you have to go back to the business. You either have to, I think, reset expectations, which could take some time. In our case, there was a collective fear that the industry wouldn't come back to life in 2012. And for us as entrepreneurs, we felt that the best path back then was to sell, was to exit. In 2020 hindsight, the market did come back, and perhaps we wouldn't have made that decision. And perhaps under different pressure with a different set of investors or a different team, we might have thought differently. So I think that all of these things are huge learnings, and it takes time. That's why I said early on, the other two P's to add are certainly passion, but ultimately partnership, because that's what this is. It's a huge, long journey, and you need to understand their philosophy and your own core philosophy is how to manage, how to look at the future. Things change every single day, and you might be faced with a pivot decision. Do we get into a totally different business? Do we move out of digital, do we move out of coupons and get into e-commerce? And being able to make those tough decisions with your board is fundamental and critical.
Thanks. So before I open it for Q&A, any one of you have any points you want to make on the subject? Deep?
One last point, that when things go south, the one thing that we tell all our investing companies is communicate more when things are bad. And, never try and sort of, hide bad things under the table because of the fear of, what people will say. It's at that point actually that trust either gets built or lost. So, you communicate more when times are bad, people will understand.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, right? I'm saying, as investors, we know that we're also in business, which means there are no certainties to life. So we have, as much, we also know that projections are speculative. And if someone is telling you that I'm really signing on to invest because you're going to meet this target in 3 years from now, I think he's an idiot. because it's certainly there is no such certainty in life. I think what you have is a plan, and what you have, there's a financial plan, but then there is a game plan in terms of what you're trying to do, and some things will work out and some things will not. I think, and for sure, I don't know of a single investment which I have made in the last 9 years where things have been like this every year. It's just not possible. So I think the key is what Deep said, which is just communicate, over-communicate all the time, and of course, certainly when things are going south, because we all know that it happens and that it's okay.
That's a very, I would say, very nice thing to hear, because I have personally been involved in some companies where when things really went bad and we were called in by the investors to help the company recover from there, and this is the first thing which we found, the lack of communication, that those channels had broken down and there was no way to, everything else we can do. We can help them do the right merchandise, we can help them reduce their cost, but how do you sort out this part? And like Pradeep, you were saying that you don't want to continue fighting, because it's not about that you're fighting whenever the meeting happens. Your mind is completely distracted. And this is the reason, because some of the stories which go out there, the hesitation comes from there. And that's why when we thought of this panel discussion, I was very excited, because this is something people have been wanting to hear, that there are real people on the other side as well. They understand business, and things are not, can go wrong between a vendor and a buyer also. Similarly, they can go wrong between an investor and investee also. This is real life. Conflicts will happen. So any last words?
Yeah, just as a part of preparation for this panel, did some homework. So a message for a young fashion graduate trying to seek fund in future. Very simple, 2-3 do's. What I realized from discussion and on my own experience of last so many years, that probably whatever you might think of a new business, it might take more time and may require more capital. So just sort of keep these basics when you make a business plan, that whatever you may say is the need of the business, look at little time axis, which could be a little more than what you what you believe in sitting in an office. It may take more time, it may take more capital. And second thing is that, see, the P fund, most of these funds have a very clear construct and mandate. These are words you will hear, because they raise funds from their LPs based on a certain mandate. So they have a certain way. They will, some start invest in startups, some don't. They have a check size, and there are a lot of technicalities in their thing. But you have your own business. My message here is that don't change your business plan just because the financial industry has a construct or a mandate. Now, your business plan doesn't change. I mean, you can't add another $5 million to your need because the fund has, the minimum ticket size is 5 months. So your business plan don't change. Stick to your basics. Your business is your business. It doesn't matter. And somewhere God is there. I'm sure you will get your fund from, if not from Fund A, maybe from the Fund B. But your business plan should not change based on these mandates and these constructs. And the final word, as an industry person, I would say is that, I just heard somebody say that we don't trust the numbers. Now, honesty in any business, and as an industry person, I feel shame when we hear these things where the data entrepreneurs given are wrong and it's fudge. And we all know, we've read these stories in the newspapers. So for the next crop, for the next generation, please stick to honesty. And the financial industry, I know it's so incestuous. They all work in same kind of companies. They live in the same building. They all go to the same colleges. It's so cookie cutter industry that if you do something wrong and it gets sort of leaked out, you're going to shut down your doors with this small cookie cutter industry called fund. They'll never fund that promoter in case you've done something wrong with some other fund. The news does leak out. So stay honest, stay true to your business plan. Assume it'll take a little longer time, and assume that it'll take a little more capital than what your business plan says.
Good message. Good message. So these are the Marwadis of the new world. So don't take any panga with them. That's the message. Secondly, when you were saying that it always takes more money and more time than you plan, so please plan very tightly. Don't start accounting for more and more in your original business plan, because it will still take more time and more money. So you will end up with running over the budgets all the time. Anything else?
No, I just second exactly what Shailesh said, and I think the notion of simplicity is critical. Keeping it simple, things get very, 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 very complex, and I think that at the end of the day, you've written a plan, you're not going to go according to plan, try to keep as much money as you can in the bank. And the last thing I would say is really find people like Harminder who are industry experts, knowledge advisors, people who've invested early stage and knows the kind of risks ahead. So try to find an advisory group that you can surround yourself with that can help kind of round out your own knowledge.
Thanks, Sanjay. Any questions? We can take maybe a couple of them. How are we doing on time?
We're doing okay on time. We have time for questions, so we can get them going.
Hello. Hi, VD. My question is for you. So, we've seen other industries which have been radically transformed using technology, such as taxi, Uber, hospitality, Airbnb, etc. We haven't really seen a mainstream revolution in fashion, right? We are seeing slithers of it with maybe like a Rent a Runway, which is an American unicorn. But there haven't been any mainstream revolutions, right, in fashion. Do you think that the industry needs to be rethought from ground up? Where do you see the future from a revolutionary standpoint?
I think it's a fair observation. But we are in the privileged position where we hope to see something. And I think this is not seen by us. As I always say, these are seen by someone special, a founder, an entrepreneur who is thinking of imagining this business differently. And what we hope to do is that when we encounter them, we see what they see. And you're right. It's a very large industry which is, which has seen its slithers and various ways in which differentiation has happened, right? Whether it is brands getting built or how the brands are getting distributed or how they're using the power of technology and online distribution to change the way. So we are seeing slithers and big strokes of innovation in terms of how it has got built. But that type of a transformational impact we have not seen, but we hope to see.
Any more questions? Okay, while we wait for you to digest that information, let me pose a couple of questions to our guests. One to the Sequoia capitals of the world in terms of, well, generally venture capitalists and PE funding, etc. How, in the here and now, how sensitive are you to economic calibrations? It's been a rotten start to the year, to say the least, in terms of what's happening with both the share market and the general economy. How sensitive are you to something like that with respect to funding and industry, which could be considered discretionary and ultra discretionary at that? It's the first thing you would think people would drop in terms of purchasing.
Of course, fashion is discretionary, but there is a long range of things that are more discretionary than hopefully clothes. So,
such as
one would think watches and cars, and there's a long list of things that you could deprioritize. Hopefully, food, beverages, and apparel are more basic. No, I don't think one should overread into how a January start is there from a stock market perspective or what you see in the pink newspapers. I think our customers, our limited partners, the reason they invest behind an Everstone or a Sequoia is so that we can continue to find opportunities systematically to invest across a cycle. Right. So for me, what is a more important number is how is the Indian economy doing? How is their pickup on that? Are consumers beginning to shop less, shop more, and therefore what does it mean? For entrepreneurs. I think the most we keep joking that some of the best businesses and some of the best entrepreneurs have started businesses at tough times. Because tough times, when you start a business in tough times, you don't have to teach perseverance, right? I'm saying you start with perseverance. So there are some of the P's that was mentioned which kind of get fixed very early on in terms of simplicity of business model, in terms of how you think about capital needed for the business. Many of those can be problems when you start business in more prosperous times. Those business problems get fixed even at the time when you start. Your DNA is absolutely right in terms of how you think about the business. So we think of these as opportunities to actually find more investments and I would say lean forward. I would, if I go back to even our history, not very long history, I think some of our best investments, or at least those that are shaping up to be our best investments, happened between July and September of 2013. You know, and this was the time when you'll have WhatsApp jokes on, will rupee be 70, 90, 100, you know, and all that kind of stuff. So
I wonder if that was a joke as well.
yeah, look, and some of our best investments happened at that time. So I actually think when great entrepreneurs step out to start businesses and when they get funding is almost irrelevant to the cycle. That's where the bigness of the market helps you. But tough times, you know, help you start with the right piece.
My second question is to funds and promoters alike. Why is it that one hasn't seen the kind of scale you've seen in other consumer discretionary spaces? I mean, I haven't heard, correct me if I'm wrong, of any such fashion brand looking to hit the market to raise extra capital. We don't have a Jubilant Foodworks in the form of fashion industry. Why don't we think big? Is it just difficult enough to hit the market? Is it too many regulatory hurdles? Or do you not want to get into a capital market space where there might be greater accountability?
I totally agree with you. Scale is one of the biggest challenges in the industry. The scale is dependent upon so many macro factors and micro factors. It depends upon production, which was abundant a few years back, a few decades back, but thanks to regulatory issues, production hit a dead wall. Then the distribution part. The malls have just come in around 8-9 years back. Before that, the distribution was always a question. So and right now, of course, the mall distributor model is also under cloud. It is the online distribution model which is taking shape. So these are issues, and yes, the industry has not been able to take them on head on. But having said that, I'm an optimist. I think the beginning has been made. It's the beginning of a wave. We are going to see decent numbers, decent scales in the near future, and that should. There have been a few examples. A few companies have hit IPOs and successfully done that. But yes, as majority of them have not been able to cross the 500 crore mark.
So,
But some of the large businesses, they are
Yeah.
embedded. If you look at the Arvind brands, you look at the Madura garments, they are embedded in the listed company, and they're fairly large. We are
But it's
talking
also a
numbers of-
diverse company. I mean, that's my point.
No,
Why
within
don't we
that,
have
the
a
fashion
purebred
business-
player?
fashion
They do have
business
a
is very
fashion
large,
business,
very large.
which also went through many waves because of the
Yes.
textile industry and the
Right.
problems it faces. I'm saying, why don't we have?
There's a bit of an inflection point which happens especially in our sector, at about $3,000 per capita. Now we are still about 30%, we're about 4-5 years short. So I was just reading yesterday, there was a news article which came to my desk, which was that Adidas is going to open 3,000 new stores in China. Now the interesting point was not that they were going to open 3,000, it was that they already had 9,000 stores. So they were going to open 3,000 on a base of 9,000. So, so we are a little, I think, 4-5 years away. There's a specific inflection point, and you're right. We've not yet hit no single brand that I know is more than 800 crores yet. But I think, with the kind of growths that we are seeing, we will eventually get there.
I would
add?
say the same
Sure,
thing, that
yeah.
next 10 years might surprise you. So we are looking at, rear view mirror and then saying that not happen. That's true. And I'm not doubting that bit. But what's happening in the industry today, the next 10 years, I mean, we keep talking about Jockey, as a market cap close to 4 billion, more than Arvind plus Madura put together. Who would have imagined that an underwear brand would have a $4 billion market cap, or a Domino's Pizza would have a market cap in India higher than the Domino's Pizza parent company's market cap, or a Suzuki has a market cap in India which is like close to 70% of the Suzuki Japan's market cap. So just give you some data point. 1989, Louis Philippe was the first brand launch. Van Heusen got launched in 92. Shoppers Stop, first department store, I think 94. Lifestyle, I think, came in 99. So if you really see, a lot of these things have happened in sort of not that distant past. And first time the brands reach 100 city distribution was not even 10 years back. Today we are talking about a distribution which is reaching to 400, 500 cities in sort of sensitive price point brand. I run Tommy Hilfiger. We are in 54 cities. I mean, you cannot imagine 5 years back somebody said a brand of Tommy Hilfiger's price point would be available in cities like Bhatinda and Patiala and Rajkot and Calicut. You'd be surprised, but we are there and we're doing good business out of that. So yes, what has happened in the past, it happens slow, and the inflection point, like Deep said, has happened. But next 10 years, I'm very confident will surprise all of us.
Without naming names, I also want to point out that many of these retailers, stroke textile companies have a checkered past, so that might have something to do with it. You wanted to weigh in on this?
I just wanted
Yeah.
to say, I think 2 points. One is Deep's point is a very important point. I think India's per capita income today is the same as what China had in 2008. So on a like-to-like basis, we're 8 years behind. And if you look at what has happened in China between 2008 and 2016, I'm not saying the same thing will happen in India, but it's a pointer to what has happened. The good news is today you have at least some companies with significant market cap. You know, Jockey, I would say a significant part of Arvind's value is probably riding on the brands versus the denim business. You have an Aditya Birla, which is, you know, demerged its entities and is again valuable. I think you're beginning to have at least, not too many, but at least you're beginning to see signs and pointers. And I can tell you as an investor, in 2008, when I would go out and meet a company, and if someone said, I have 100 crores of revenue in apparel and a brand, I would say, wow, right? In the last 16 weeks, I've met like 3 companies that are going to do 100 crores, all of them which have been started in maybe 3 years. And some of them have ridden on the wave of organized retail, which is Shopper Stop and lifestyle. Some of them have ridden on the wave of, you know, putting their own store. Some of them have ridden the wave of online. Unbelievable. And I think that is, now I know since we see companies in the 100 crore range, we may be an early indicator, if you will, you know, to someone like Everstone, which is waiting for maybe bigger companies. But if that tells you something, it just tells you, today when someone says, I'm going to build a 100 crore apparel brand, I don't think it is that big a deal versus what it was in 2008, which was not very far away.
And what flow through does that translate to in terms of margins and bottom line? For
Good
100
margins,
crores,
good
right?
margins. You know,
Yeah.
these are not guys giving away money for free. These are all guys who make money on every purchase. You know, so as an entrepreneur actually told me this. He said, we have purchases, we don't have transactions.
Someone there, can we get him a mic? The gentleman in white.
Yeah, hi. My name is Nikunj. I run a company called What's Extra. I have a question for VT, and maybe the gentleman from Everstone could also take it. Is it true that investors could punish a company which is, let's say, relatively, you know, doing sensible and mature things for, let's say, sins of somebody else? I mean, and where I'm coming from is, like, I am sufficiently capitalized for now. I am building a business which has a good product, and maybe you're trying to do certain experiments around the periphery. I have a CFO on demand, who is suggesting me that if you are getting, you know, incoming interest from 3 different VCs, might as well take the money when it's available. And I mean, I'm not very keen on entertaining those offers right now. I'm more keen on building the business my way right now. But he's saying that, you know what, if there are mishaps in the tech space in the coming 6 months, it could turn the sentiment even more negative. So maybe you should be mindful of that, and you may be doing sensible things, but you can be painted in the same brush, and they may just, you know, not be available 6 months down the line. So what is your opinion on that? I mean, do you weigh each opportunity to its own merits, or are you biased at times because of mistakes or sins done by somebody else?
You must be a rare breed, a promoter who's turning down capital from 3 sources, saying now is not the time. But venture capitalists and PE guys, please do.
I'm going to be practical here. I think capital is moody. So it's not about whether there are 3 guys today or whether there are 10 guys today or whether there's only 1 person tomorrow. So if you ask me the question, is Sequoia Capital going to be around to invest? The answer is yes. But the reality is that it's a competitive market. And therefore, the speed at which someone comes and gives, is willing to invest, and the price at which they're willing to invest, of course, is a function of competition. And capital is one of the moodiest things in the world. It does come in bursts and flows. Having said that, the way you should, I urge entrepreneurs whom we partner with to think about life is that you're going to raise capital at multiple points in your life. And therefore, from a value perspective or a valuation perspective, you will get averaged out. There will be times when you raise money and money is available easily. There will be time when money is hard. And over an average life cycle, if you raise money 3-4 times in 10-15 years, you will catch enough up cycle and down cycle. And I think on a weighted average basis, you'll be fine. The most important thing is, do you need capital? I think that is the most important question. If you see yourself needing capital in the next 24 months, you absolutely should raise capital if it is easily available. If you don't see the need, or it is really hard to imagine why you would need capital, then for sure. Then you should, just read all the newspaper articles, feel excited about it or depressed about it, but just not bring it to the business. But from your perspective, it is really about, do you see yourself needing capital in the next 24 months? If you need it, for sure you should raise it when it's available. Because capital is extremely moody and it does comes in waves and goes deep.
Totally agree with VT. If you need it, raise while you can.
Yeah, the only other thing.
It's not a moral science class. It is exactly like business. So there will be times when capital is available and it feels like, my God, it's so easy. And there'll be times when it is so hard. And yes, good people get punished when economy does badly, and bad people do well when things go right, and that's life.
Absolutely.
So it has nothing to do with capital.
From an entrepreneur's
Karma's a
perspective,
bitch,
that's
right?
absolutely right. The only other thing is, if you're in a winner-take-all category, and you have the opportunity to take as much mind share, market share, etc., take the capital and build it out. Because if you don't, someone else will. So I think that's another way to look at your opportunity here.
I think a lady over there had a question in the blazer. Can we get her a mic?
My question again to Sequoia. So you spoke about some serious business entrepreneur which are there, and then the other side where niche is created out of the market. That's where the major business, according to you, is going towards the right direction. So India per se, I understand there is a large number of people who are still running the traditional business, and there is a large talent pool as well, which has a lot of passion to create the new niche that we are talking about. What, according to you, is the bridge between that?
I think that piece of what I said was very specific in Shailesh's context. So what would you tell young entrepreneurs who are coming today? And I think I would urge them to be focused. I would urge them to get not seduced by the very large market size, but really focus on what you're trying to do. I think in terms of distribution, absolutely you're right. There is a very large MBO network which exists today where a lot of apparel business happens. I think as a young entrepreneur, I think the most important thing for you is, how do you deal with that trade maybe differently from how others have dealt with it in the past. And the reason I say that is, if you deal with the trade the same way it has been done in the past, then this business will require a lot more capital than you think, and your feedback cycle from the end customer will take much more longer. So I don't think you can bypass or ignore the trade, but I think it is about you working with the trade on your terms. And Jockey has taught to everyone in this industry and every investor in this industry that you can run this business on cash and carry, the way a consumer product company does. But the beauty of that is not so much that the capital required to build your business is small. The beauty of that is you get instant feedback. And the guy who is buying it from you takes you seriously. So you go and offer him 3 products and you say, you give boss cash do, nahi to I'm not giving the product to you. He's really asking the question saying, will I sell it? Otherwise he's saying, chalo aapka product dikha denge, agar bika to aapko paisa de denge. So it's very, very different mindset. And you want to do business with people who are serious about business.
Do you think Go Colors, Mr. Prem, had done it?
In the interest of time, we're going to make it 1 question per person, so everyone has some space. No one this side, so let me get a mic to this gentleman here in the dark blue shirt. I'll come back to you, sir. I'll come back.
Yeah, good evening. So I just want to know from our funding companies, how does it work? Like, there are online companies who are showing losses every quarter, every year, and still they get the funding. So is it still, it's a juicy picture, what they show? Or is it your confidence in the companies ki yes, online is going to grow like everyone is talking about, so it will work, so keep investing. Like today, the headlines in Eco Times also, ki are one of the biggest online company has 18 months fund to burn in this market. And our biggest online, this thing, Amazon has offered to take over, but they have denied it. So what do you have to say on that? I mean, beside being losses, still they have investors. How does it work?
Over the last 2 years, this is the big Grecian myth that we are trying to solve. How do you value these companies? What is the valuation? And what's happening? Any of you gentlemen, welcome to take it.
So you asked the question, do you have an answer as well for this?
No, maybe with your question I can answer, but I just wanted to know. I was very curious actually.
So I don't have an answer for that, VT, because and you also, being a very practical investor, invest in things for which you'll have very right. And they said that systematic, like they say for individual, and he used the word and I really liked it, that they are in the business of investing. They are, while capital is moody, but they are not in the business of being moody. They invest in serious businesses, and there's a systematic way in which they evaluate the companies and put money. So you are questioning that why these companies are getting funded even while they are making losses. So either he has to share some trade secrets with you, otherwise you have to make an assumption.
Okay.
He has a plan.
No, because I was quite, I appreciate everyone, like we were talking about entrepreneurs. This was also a question in mind, which was answered, or rather asked at the stage, and it was answered. But
So
this has been going on.
So let me take a shot at answering that. And we are venture investors, so we are early stage investors. So, we may not have invested large dollars in companies which may have losses at a bigger stage. But so certainly many of the companies we are investing in very early sometimes just have a business plan, or they will have losses in the first few years. And I think there are two ways of looking at a business. And I'll give you two examples. I think there are some businesses, what we look at and what I look at, I can say for myself, is we are looking at how much is this company able to grow, how much gross margin do they have in the product. And of course, in the early days, they will be loss-making because they're trying to build the market. But eventually, because they have gross margins and 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever the number, they will get to profitability. And gross margin is an early indicator of what the steady state EBITDA in this business will be. So that is one way of investing. And I can for sure tell you that, we are investors in a snack company, we are investors in a deodorant company at an early stage. Of course, at the early stage, they were not making profits because they may be over-investing in marketing, which may be the case in a company like Fog, or over-investing in distribution, which may be the case in a company like Yellow Diamond. But you are able to see the gross margins today. And unless there is something dramatically wrong, you can believe that the gross margins can sustain at these levels in the future. So if something is a food business at 35% gross margin, you can believe that it will be in the 33 to 37 zone, maybe 5 years out. So as long as you build the business properly, you will eventually get to profitability in terms of EBITDA, and it will get the right EBITDA at that point of time, and therefore it will be valuable. So you are in such cases taking a view on the gross margin characteristics of the business and saying that this will play out. So that's one way where you invest in a loss-making company early on and you ascribe a price. The second, and this happens more in technology, is where you take a view that there are a few businesses, very, very few businesses, that have winner-take-all characteristics. And what you mean by that is, while early on you start with multiple players in the business, eventually these are monopolistic businesses. So eventually there is one WhatsApp, eventually there is one Facebook. Many of you may have started using search in 96, 97, 99. There were so many companies, Yahoo, Alta Vista, Lycos. I don't even know whether some of the younger folks may have never heard of these companies. But you were using all these to search. But then now, so there are some, very few, winner-take-all businesses where eventually these become monopoly businesses because of the nature of the business. Not because of the amount of money you had, or not because, and only the special founders can really become successful there. I think in these companies that you speak of, where you see significant losses, I think the implicit assumption which investors are making is that there will eventually be only one winner. And that one winner will be much more valuable than anyone else. But the implication also, if there are 5 guys, there are going to be 4 who are not going to be winners. So where I guess investors are taking the view, and so on a relative basis, they are saying, I think there's a greater shot of this guy being the winner versus someone else. But this is for, again, let me repeat, very, very, very few businesses. If you go and count and say how many winner-take-all businesses exist, there are not that many. They are disproportionately in technology compared to other markets.
I heard the exact same explanation at the India Retail Forum last year. It was explained in a similar way with a Bollywood comparison where you look at 100 heroes and you basically have to sit down and pick out Shah Rukh Khan. So good luck with that one. We have time for one final question. Yeah, to you.
Hi. My name is Viresh. My question is for Shailesh. Shailesh, you picked up a point that execution in India is not up to that mark. And as an example, you gave in DLF Mall of India, which you have recently visited at Noida. Can you elaborate on execution? As exactly what are the points that you were looking for? Were the visual presentation of the store or the store layout that you found weren't executed properly?
See, there are, when you say execution, there is a softer aspect of execution and there is a data that poor execution throws up or a good execution throws up. So let me first take the softer aspect of it. Let's say if I go to Mall of India and I see a store, it could be a department store, could be a mono-brand store. Now, most of us are trying to tell a story, right? So if you go to Tommy Hilfiger store there, in this season we have a island lifestyle. So we are trying to tell people that, you know, you can dress well like this and it's a mindset which is in a coastal island kind of lifestyle. There's a story, that a point of view you're trying to communicate. Now you execute that through windows, through mannequin, through styling, through everything, you know, that you put it in the store. So that's a softer aspect, that how good the execution of that point of view, that storytelling is in that brand or that department store or whatever. So Amazon, I see the ad campaign, it says Amazing India or something like that. I see the garments, etc. You go to the site, whether that ad campaign is being executed well on Amazon or not, that's a point of view I'm saying. So that's a one way to sort of look at, and whether the point of view is executed well, where the windows, the styling is done on that. Second part of execution is that it's hard business eventually, right? So a good execution, whether it's talking about taking cash collection or somebody doing a high sales density, sales per square foot per day, or a discounting norm in your business, things like delivering goods on time in the season, you know, taking out the sale on time, removing the goods. So having, when you go to a store, adequate number of people in the morning, 11 o'clock, the mall has just started. A lot of stores don't have good number of people, minimum number of people at the store. On weekend, when there's busy, people don't have enough number of cash tills at the stores and people are unnecessarily in the queue. So really look at the hard fact of the execution, and then you compare and say internationally if it's done like this, in India we see a gap. That's what I meant by execution. So there are a lot of things, whether it's a storytelling gap versus an execution on time or numbers or sort of whatever we're trying to service the customer. I hope I'm trying to give you a sort of a direction, a hint what I'm talking about.
Okay, I think I haven't been fair to this side. Is there anyone here who'd like a question with, yeah, can we get a mic to the gentleman?
Hi. So we have fairly established that fashion is finally a business to invest into. Just slicing and dicing into 3 segments, which we call BTL, premium or mass premium. Just want to understand what you feel BTL gonna be in next 5 years. Maybe Mr. Shailesh can take that question. Basically, need to know where do you see these so-called bridge to luxury brands faring up in next 5 years?
Okay.
Specifically the luxe brands, or do
yes.
you? Okay.
The premium and luxury brands.
No. I'm saying somewhere we said 2 things in this discussion. One is there's an immense growth opportunity, and in fact we were almost down talking. I think don't talk too much about growth, and execution is more important. So growth is there, and it's really on every parameter, number of cities, business size, you see growth. So that way it's doing well. Also somewhere I think I was trying to talk to her saying that next 10 years will surprise us. So inflection points are happening. So I think the on most parameters I would say we will be pleasantly surprised, and we are all wiser by our own experiences of the past, and we will not make the same mistakes going forward. So also the way India is standing out today, probably compared to other markets, it's still sort of holding on in one way or other. It's still slightly below what our ideal expectations are, but I think there are a lot good happening on the ground. So I'm very optimistic and positive about future.
And you should bite your tongue every time you say inflection point, because that ranges from 1 to 12. You wanted to add something on that?
I just wanted to say that the most important question is for you to identify the segment that you're comfortable playing. Whether it is in luxury, or whether it is premium, or whether it's bridge to luxury, or whether it is affordable. I think across the board, there is space for innovation, and there is space for someone who's focused and building business in a way which is different maybe from traditionally, so that you can scale the business. I think it's about what you are comfortable with. I think the good news for you is that, if 10 years back, I can go back and tell you, in 2002, when we made the recommendations to the luxury brand, we actually told them, just go back and come back after 5-7 years. India is just not ready for you. So at least 10 years back or 8 years back, there were segments where genuinely there was skepticism on, can you ever build something here? The good news is now we are probably at a base stage where in most cases, if you're starting out, it really shouldn't matter.
On that note, a warm round of applause, please. I think it's been an extremely engaging discussion with our guests today. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you, gentlemen.